Not quite yet.
Oh, okay.
Good.
So should I sit?
Good morning,
Yes.
Senate Agriculture.
Yes,
It's Wednesday, January 22nd on a frosty morning in Vermont. So, hope everybody's doing well with that and their heat's staying on and everything's good. We are going to have a busy day today. We were a little pressed on time yesterday. Normally I introduce or have senators introduce themselves on our first day. We're gonna do that again today because we didn't do it yesterday. So starting over here.
Yep, Brian Collmore representing the Rutland District.
And Rob Plunkett representing the Bennington District. Steve Heffernan representing the Addison District.
Joe Major representing the Windsor District.
We have over here
Linda Lehman, Committee Assistant.
Senator Russ Ingles, Chair of the Committee from Essex District. So welcome everyone. How is everyone?
I'm great.
Good. We're gonna start the morning out talking with Vermont Citizens Advisory Committee on Lake Champlain's future. And welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm going to introduce myself, and I brought some of my fellow commissioners or council members, citizens, I guess, of Vermont with me today, and I'm going to pass out our action plan.
Yep.
My name is Denise Smith, and I am the chair of the Vermont Citizens Advisory Committee. That's my volunteer job. As my professional job, I serve as the executive director of the Vermont Council on Rural Development, and I think we met in Lunenburg.
I think we did.
So first, I just want to thank you for hosting us today. We're really grateful to be able to be here to present this. The Citizens Advisory Committee, for those of you who do not know us, was enacted in legislation, in enabling legislation in 1989, which was before the Lake Champlain Basin Program existed in the state of Vermont. We are one of 3 Citizens Advisory Committees for Lake Champlain. There's one in New York. There's also one in Quebec. And then there's us, and we're all supported by the Lake Champlain Basin Program in terms of helping us as our backbone. I mean, they help organize our meetings. They bring expert witnesses to our meetings for us. And then they help us produce our action plan. What I want to bring your attention to this morning, does anybody have any question about the Citizens Advisory Committee or how? And we're all appointed by the governor. That's the other thing you should know. We usually serve 3 to 4 year terms. Some of us have been on it for quite some time. This is my 2nd year as chair. So you saw me, if you were in this committee last year, you probably saw me. We come every year to the legislature to present
One saw
this.
you.
One saw me, he did, I remember you. We come every year to the legislature to present our action plan. That is our one task as an advisory committee, is to bring the voices of the citizens to Lake Champlain. One of the things that I just want to mention, we talk about Lake Champlain because that's who we serve, is that lake, but this really does apply to all of our water bodies in Vermont. Lake Carmi is one of I live in Franklin County. Lake Carmi flows into Lake Champlain. So as we think about Lake Champlain, we have to think about what we're doing upstream for the water before it filters down into Lake Champlain. So the rivers and lakes that are connected, but also other lakes within the state of Vermont. We have created a Venn diagram this year, which is at the beginning of your report, and really what we work for in the center is a healthy future for Lake Champlain, which means water quality, healthy ecosystems, and climate resilience. And so to get those things, we need biodiversity. So we need a diverse habitat, we need flood management, and we need water management. And our priorities this year are really focused on those 3 aspects of keeping Lake Champlain thriving. We have, there's economic data in terms of how much money Lake Champlain brings into the state of Vermont. It's a huge asset and it's a huge resource to our economy and to our state. One thing I just want to say is we really focus 4 different things around flood resilience, adaptation, and mitigation. One of the things that I'll probably come back and talk to you about in my VCRD role is working lands and the importance of keeping farmlands, forest lands open and working. So not only do they benefit the ecosystem of the ecology of our region, but also the ecosystem of Vermonters and their ability to make a living off those open lands. They still are the most important thing to be able to keep water clean. When we talk about clean water, we're talking about we're also talking about the things that need to be done to keep our water clean are the same things that we need to do for climate and weather resilience, so that we can continue to live and thrive in our state. So we talk a lot about upstream things that impact water quality in Lake Champlain. And so I'm going to turn it over to Breck Bowden, who's on our screen right now. And he'll introduce himself and talk a little bit more about our climate resilience part of this plan that's in our action plan.
Good morning, Brett.
Can you hear-
The floor is yours, sir.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Thank you. I'm sorry that I can't join you this morning, and I appreciate the ability to do so remotely. My name is Breck Bowden. I'm a member of the Vermont Citizen Advisory Committee, and I'm a recently retired professor from the University of Vermont, the Rubenstein School, where my expertise is in watershed science and planning. And as Denise mentioned, we have 4 focus areas that's within this first priority on flood mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. And I want to talk about the first 3 of these, and then Hillary will follow up with the last of these after me. The first focus area is on the importance of riparian and floodplain restoration. So our headwater river corridors, floodplains, wetlands, the soils and riparian areas are areas where we can make nature-based and very cost-effective improvements that will increase the resilience of our landscapes and our communities to future flooding. These approaches are things that help to store carbon in the system. They help to maintain biodiversity, and they help to keep our receiving waters clean. So we are recommending, we're asking that as you consider legislation that's coming through this year, that you invest in these nature-based solutions, that you provide full funding and enhanced collaboration within those programs in DEC that are responsible for these sorts of programs, and to resist the pressure to push back on timelines to implement these programs. It's urgent that, as you know, we've faced difficult flooding in the last 2 years, and urgent that we address this as soon as possible. The second area that I want to talk about is closely connected to this. It's on aquatic connectivity in our system. So dams and culverts are things that cut off and fragment our water network. And in so doing, they reduce its capacity to do the sorts of things that it's supposed to do in protecting us from flooding. And so we are asking for that you consider continued funding and research for the implementation of river connection restoration and aquatic organism passage. That's going to help to maintain the capacity of our systems to deal with future flooding, and will have additional benefits with respect to habitat improvement and biodiversity improvement. The third component, focus area that I want to speak to is developed land use. Much of the infrastructure that we rely on for drinking water, for wastewater, for stormwater control is decades old. And in many cases, in wastewater and drinking water is beyond its design life. So these systems are already being stressed, and they're being stressed further by the additional rainfall and rainfall intensity that we are seeing as a consequence of climate change. As we consider the need to build more housing, that housing is going to stress our systems for waste treatment, stormwater treatment, water delivery even further. And so there is an urgent need for us to support efforts that are going to provide funding to improve our developed land infrastructure. So we're asking you to consider several things here. First is to support efforts that are going to limit construction and development in these vulnerable river corridor areas that I talked about in our first focus area, that you provide funding for failing municipal infrastructure that needs to be replaced, that you consider continuation of the Healthy Homes Initiative. And very importantly, we need to kind of grapple, because of the rural nature of our state, many of our homeowners are on septic systems that are not connected, of course, to a municipal system. These septic systems are a potential threat, an actual threat to water quality. And we need to provide programs that are providing education and outreach and oversight on the education for homeowners and oversight of septic systems so that we can ensure that they are in proper working order. Just as an example, our neighbor across the lake in New York, the Lake George Park Commission, instituted a mandatory septic inspection system for properties around Lake George that were within 500 feet of the lake or 100 feet of a stream that was going into the lake. Once every 5 years, there's a mandatory inspection now of those septic systems. In the first year of this program in 2003, they found 54% of the septic systems were failed and in need of upgrading or replacement. So we can expect that in many rural areas, this might be, we might have a similar experience here in Vermont. With that, I will turn it over to Hillary
Can I ask you a question?
address
Absolutely.
the final component.
Brett, we have a question from
Yeah.
Senator Joe Major, Senator Major, sorry.
No, that's okay. Do we have an idea of how many septic systems are around are within that area to lakes?
I don't believe that that's been ever analyzed, as far as I know. I know that 55% of Vermonters are on septic. That is the most in the nation by percentage. So there are more Vermonters on septic than there are on systems.
You would have to map every septic system around the lake and all the rivers that flow into it, which is, I think, Breck, you said 50% of Vermont flows into Lake Champlain. Is that accurate?
Yes, 50% drains to Lake Champlain, 50% drains to the Connecticut River. But this is, I mean, we are here representing Lake Champlain, but this is an issue that's really across the entire state.
So
Lori might, sorry, just Lori might know the answer. I see her typing something maybe. Lori Fisher from Lake Champlain Committee. Has it ever been calculated, Lori, the number of septic systems around Lake Champlain on the Vermont side?
No, I don't think so, not in recent times. And it's 56% of Vermont's land acreage draining into Lake Champlain.
Okay.
yeah,
You had a question too, Mr. Chair?
go ahead.
No. So, Breck, I'm wondering, you asked for funding in 3 of the 4 points. Do you know whether that funding is in the governor's budget? And then you also talked about timelines, especially with regard to the floodplain restoration. I'm wondering which timelines you're talking about.
I'm talking about, Representative, I'm talking about a general timeline that there's an urgency that we address these issues as soon as we can. And with respect to the governor's budget, I'm sorry, I don't personally know whether that funding is in there. So I should check that.
Okay, thank you.
And just, I'm sure if we read this far enough and all of that, and because we're a very new committee, what typically is the funding that you get from the legislature? And what sources? Does it come from here? Does it come from other committees, or you know?
So most of the funding that's going to Lake Champlain right now, a lot of it is coming through the Lake Champlain Basin Program, EPA program. So those are given out the grants across the basin. We also have the Clean Water Fund, which is being funded currently through 2027. So this would be something we would love for you to watch for us, is the property tax transfer. we get money from that
Right.
goes to the Clean Water Fund, and that's a fund that's overseen by all of the agencies. I think it's
4% or something like that.
it's like 1%. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
really small amount of the
Well,
property
actually, it's a big
transfer tax.
amount. It's a small percentage.
A small
That's a big
percentage,
amount.
but it's a nice
Right.
sum of money
Right.
that comes to be able
Right.
to support all of this work that's happening in the basin. And I know that they've done, actually, every year they give us a report on what they're using that money for and where it's going. And with any large sum of money that comes into any agency, there's always some growing pains in terms of how they deliver those programs. And so I think checking in with the secretary of the agency would be a great idea on that one. So they can give you a report and an update on how that Clean Water Fund is being managed and what types of programs they're funding. But there continues to be gaps in some of the programs that we need funding for. And Hillary has a lot more information on that.
Well, we're probably gonna have a lot
share.
more questions, but we'll let you guys continue on and maybe you're gonna answer some of them, but
Yeah.
I'm probably gonna go down the road
Yeah.
of where Senator Major was headed and Senator Collmore as well. So, yeah, continue on, please.
Great, thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
I'm Hillary Solomon with the Poultney Meadowy Natural Resources Conservation District and also a member of the CAC and sort of represent the southern part of Lake Champlain. I did want to go back to the septic question as well, and just to let you know, I did some work one year and I went to door to door to every house in a small town that's along one of my streams and asked people about their septic, and a significant portion of them were actually on dry wells. So that's not even currently accepted practice anymore. Grandfathered in, yeah, and just in terms of treatment that's happening or not happening and the state of our septic in Vermont. But I'm actually this morning talking about, I'm going to start with agriculture. So just looking at flood mitigation, climate adaptation, and resilience through our working lands with a focus on ag and forestry. We come every year and ask for sort of continued and additional support for programs that support farms that are trying to diversify and programs that support landowners, farms, and forested landowners who are trying to implement water quality practices on their lands. And since 2016, the funding has increased, and there have been sort of measurable results in the Lake Champlain Basin in terms of water quality improvements, and in some cases, some improvements in resilience and flood resilience. However, as you know, there were two major floods in 2023 and 2024, and the agricultural community across the state of Vermont lost $18.5 million because of damages from those floods. I think it was 2 years ago, there were $2.1 million designated for sort of diversification programs on farms, including maple, poultry, and meat maple poultry. And those farmers, so 522 farmers in Vermont applied to those $2.1 million, and the total sum of those applications was for $43.6 million. So there is a need and a desire among farmers in Vermont to diversify, to become more resilient, to adapt to our changing climate. Another example of this is last year's the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative Board had $16.2 million worth of requests. These are also for sort of developmental type projects to increase the types of products that are able to be sold through our local farmers. And they only had $2.3 million to give out. So in these cases, we're seeing 10 and 20 times the amount of the funding that's available being requested from farms who are actively looking to, diversify their business models. I guess we just ask for continued support, especially those funds. A lot of them are run through the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. The conservation districts and the Agency of Ag partnered last year. We actually applied to HUD to backfill some, before the grant announcements had been awarded in the poultry and meat and maple fund. We applied to HUD for, it was millions more dollars to try and backfill that need. The money was going to go back to the Agency of Agriculture, and the conservation districts were going to help, with those applications and with checking the practices to make sure that they had been implemented. It made it up at least one step through that process, but eventually was not I think housing also was a big issue, and HUD is big with housing. So eventually it didn't make it. It wasn't, those funds weren't awarded. But any opportunity like that we can all partner on to help bring funds into Vermont or use Vermont funds to support this. I think at the CAC, we believe that these working lands that aren't developed but are used to support our economy and our wildlife and diversity are obviously very valuable within the Lake Champlain watershed. And I'm going to switch topics here. I don't know if there are any ag-related questions or if we want to save those. I'm going to switch to talk about land use a little bit. Okay. So obviously land use includes development, and we'd love to see development be sustainable in Vermont, especially as we talk about more housing and sort of increasing the spots where we have folks living. So just thinking as you consider bills and funding requests to consider, we just need to incentivize our working and developed lands to be sustainable with an emphasis on reducing non-point source or sort of diffuse pollution that's going into our water bodies. Existing developments should be brought up to current standards, and new development, it would be really nice if all new development could just treat their own stormwater. The extra stormwater they're going to generate from the roofs and driveways just gets treated right there on site. So we aren't adding to the peak flows during floods or during heavy, melts and rainfalls. We try and just keep that infiltrating into groundwater, moving to the water bodies as groundwater, not as surface water. And so the ask is just to help provide consistent sort of regulatory enforcement and support, to provide resources, technical assistance for developers, towns, farmers, landowners, as we look toward development. And just to give a little bit of context of some places where there are gaps, the Clean Water Funding Policy, which supports a lot of the project ID development and implementation of these non-point source projects or projects that are related to developed lands, is missing some key categories of project types that are fundable. And this goes back to the modeling for the TMDL and Lake Champlain, some different issues. And I'm going to be talking about this a little bit later today in the House Committee on Environment, but I can provide some information to you if you're interested. But there are gaps in the Clean Water Funding Policy, which is how those funds are allowed to be distributed. So for example, gullies in developed areas, we can use clean water funding to stabilize those gullies and address that erosion issue, but a gully in a forested area or on a farm, we don't have, they're not fundable through the Clean Water Funding Policy at this time. And the other project types are forested lands and wetlands. Those project types are not clearly defined in the Clean Water Funding Policy, and so there are inefficiencies in getting those projects on the ground. So the process to access the clean water funds is complicated, and we think that could be streamlined so we can get projects on the ground faster. Thank you, and I'm passing it to Bob, who's going to talk about contaminants.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Bob Fisher. I'm the Water Quality Superintendent for South Burlington. I live in Barre. I'm also the current past president of the Northeast Water Environment Association, which is over 2,000 members of the wastewater professionals in the Northeast. I was also the chief operator here about 10 years ago in Montpelier. So I know the system well. I know 27% of the pipes are pre-1927. So I'm here to talk about contaminants. I had one of the longest tenures on the CAC, probably 15 years, but someone who's longer is Eric Clifford, a farmer from Addison, and he unfortunately couldn't be here today. But we often have a lot in common because, there are certainly forces that feel that agriculture and or wastewater are problems, not solutions, are necessary. I'm mostly here to talk about chloride at the moment. And for once, I think that ag and wastewater won't get beat up on chloride because that's not us. Obviously, neonicotinoids and PFAS are big topics right now. We currently and also the septage, as everyone mentioned, the 55%. I manage the wastewater system in South Burlington, and it also takes in all of Colchester, so about 22 to 24,000 people. And the estimate of failing is 10 to 15% of septic tanks. Like I said, 55% of our monitors are on septic tanks. If you do some rough math, that's about 12 people. So maybe say 2 per house, 2.4. So about 6 houses, if they're completely failed and heading straight out to the river, are putting out as much phosphorus as I am with 24,000 people. So, you can see that septic is a major issue here. Also, 99% of it goes to wastewater facilities. With PFAS in it, concentrated in septage, that may become more and more difficult. That stuff has to go somewhere. Every one of us produces about, the average American male is about 188 pounds. It produces about 1 pound a day. And females and males are the same. You can go around that number, probably a little more than that. That's 365 pounds. It's got to go somewhere. Currently, we in South Burlington are mixing in a 5% our biosolids with sending it to V-Trans. And they're using it on roadways, airports where there's no upside there's no detectable PFAS above background levels. I believe Middlebury still goes to farm, but they also test, and they haven't had anything above really the state's guidance. Another issue is if we landfill it all, we do that, it's going to be a huge increase in greenhouse gases. I only go 5 miles down the road, and it's going to have to go up to Coventry at least, where they have very limited capacity, and it off gases, and the leachate comes around. So there's no easy solutions for any of these things, as you all know, just like ag land and everything else. There's no easy solutions, and one solution causes.
All it costs is money, Bob.
Oh, that's exactly. It's always about money. But what I'm really here to put on the radar is chloride. We've already got 5 impaired streams, and there's very likely going to be a TMDL for, just like there was for phosphorus, for chloride. The vast majority of that is not municipal, it's private, and those people have concerns. Somebody slips in the mall because you didn't salt, breaks their legs, sues you. It's going to be a really big issue, but it is already to the levels where it's impacting the macroinvertebrates. And in the 5 impaired streams, one of them being in South Burlington, another in Colchester, but it's a statewide issue, and it's the same as phosphorus. You could stop right now, and there's tons of it all on the ground everywhere that's going to keep coming out. So you're going to see chloride is a big emerging concern, and the CAC recommends incentivizing public and private applicators to safe de-icing in winter conditions. South Burlington is kind of leading the way on, we just gave a class to Burlington on using more modern, we track every bit of salt we use the serrated blades and anything we can to reduce salt usage. But it continues to build up, and it is going to be a big problem that Vermonters don't really probably realize right at the moment. So that's basically my part of it here.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm curious about, for years in this committee, we've talked about phosphorus reduction.
Yep.
Over and over and over again.
Me too.
We've seen some improvement, I believe, especially from the agricultural sector.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious about the chloride. What's changed? I know the state used to put salt, like pellets, on the road, and then they switched to liquid brine for a while, and that seems to be, it does more damage to the vehicles. I can tell you that from personal experience. Why is it all of a sudden like the thing to talk about?
It's because
what's changed?
Just the monitoring. It's like the monitor in South Burlington. We have 2 stations, and the salinity levels just continue to go up. So nothing's really changed so much. It's sort of like the phosphorus. It's just accumulating, and every year we throw more and more salt down, and that salt doesn't really go anywhere. It just sits there, and then it gets washed into the rivers and whatnot. So it's really from monitoring. The fact that it's now starting to impair the river. I also was a federal fishery biologist many years ago, and it's starting to impair the waterways, and that is what will get EPA's attention in Region 1, and that's we'll call it the DMDL.
So what are the alternatives to putting salt? I mean, the roads are white.
Yeah.
There's that much. What's the alternative to slippery roads and not being able to go from point A to point B?
Somewhere hopefully in the middle, but certainly reduce salt usage. I'm certainly you know, what I do is public health, running large wastewater systems, that's public health too. Driving, you know, is clearly a major conduit for problems.
Would more sand help?
I'm not a complete expert on it, but yeah, I mean, the brine, you know, does help with the mix. I know they've used, like in Idaho, some are using beet juice and whatnot. They're trying to advance it, but at the moment, really, all you can do is reduce usage. Really, it's just training for people. I think the vast majority of it is not municipal. You know, salt costs money. So any sort of training that, you know, can be applied to even there, people could save money on it. Obviously, you want to be able to go somewhere. Right, but all I can say is there's really, you know, that it has to be reduced, the salt, because it's going to continue to impair the waterways, and it's going to be just like phosphorus. The EPA is going to come down, and they are going to, you know, even now, even with reduced, you know, usage and everything else, it's going to continue to go up. So I'm here just more to ring the bell and say, here's another one for you. We've got all the problems.
Sorry, it could also be like we do with nitrogen and phosphorus on farms, like precision application. They're doing some models over around Lake George on how to do that with applicators and teaching them to use some precision applications, so you're not overspreading the salt when they put it on. I feel like Lori also might have something to add to this conversation.
Well, I just want to add something. So what about not teaching the farmers quite so much, but is teaching people that live in the municipalities. So you're talking about the harm that's done as far as private folks and all that stuff. And what about educating them a little bit more?
Yeah, that's exactly what these.
And what are communities doing as far as the ones that are adding to this problem? Are they ready to get up and write a bigger check to help clean some of this up, or what's going on with that?
There's not really much way to clean it up. You can't really remove it like phosphorus so much, or you can bind it up with chemicals, or you can actually just get rid of it. I'm not a complete expert on salt, on chloride. I'm more of an expert on, you know, municipal wastewater systems and septic is what I do. But yeah, it's gonna be education. I mean, they you know, in the end, they're gonna save money by using less salt. So there is something to be gained from that. But yes, it's education. It's 100% education is what it's really your only, you know, this isn't really affect Senate Ag so much or me so much, but it's going to affect everybody. So that's why I'm here.
I think Lori's got her hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Lori.
Thank you. Yes, so in terms of reducing salt, there are efforts underway. In fact, a lot of education and outreach has been led by Lake Champlain Sea Grant. And there will be a bill introduced in the next few weeks regarding chloride reduction. But one of the things to remember with regard to salt use is sodium chloride, which is the most commonly used salt for most of our municipalities, is not really effective at temperatures below 15 degrees Fahrenheit. And so one of the things that places where they've made great advancements in reducing that salt use is using calculators to test road pavement and to be much more strategic about the placement of salt, and to use a reduced application using sodium chloride, but also it's the brining applications which have less sodium chloride, but they're a mixture and can do a better job at keeping our roadways safe and reducing the chloride contribution to our waterways. So those are things that are being advanced, and the recommendation is to give training to our municipalities to really, have them employ more cost-effective, timely techniques that not only reduce that reduce the use of sodium chloride, but also continue to protect our roadways. I believe Breck has additional comments.
I'll just add briefly to this. I used to be the director of the Sea Grant program that Lori just mentioned, and this is not a matter of replacing salt per se. Salt used to be inexpensive, and it was, you know, the adage, if a little bit is good, a little bit more can be better. And so this is a matter of reducing the amount of salt that we put on, not so much replacing it with something else. And Representative, you're exactly right. This is about educating the road crews and the municipalities about how to be more strategic in their salt applications to avoid places that would be sensitive to chloride contamination.
I think it's as much, Breck, as educating the public as well, because I think that the
Yes.
the large amount of overuse as far as on that is like, okay, well, if 1 cup's okay, 2 is better. And of course, you know, you get into that mall situation where somebody slips and falls and there's a big lawsuit. So they're just going to spread it down as best as they can get because they don't want to be sued. But, you know, always have had a concern about, you know, where the blame goes sometimes. You know, it's kind of easy sometimes to blame the rural areas and the farmers and a lot of the areas as far as, okay, you guys are doing the pollutant because there's less of them to defend themselves. And then you get into the areas of communities of higher density, and of course that's where the votes are. Well, we can't go back and we can't blame them because we want to get elected again. So we always want to make sure that we, you know, we cover it all and we talk about it all, and we can assess who's responsible fairly where it is, so that we can come up as a committee, come up with a good battle plan to combat what we're trying to, the mission we're trying to get to.
Yeah, this is a good example of something where everyone has to be in on this. This is not just an ag issue.
Right. Senator Major.
I believe, thank you, Chair. I believe Ms. Fisher touched on this a little bit. The thing that I worry about with less salt is the safety of it. And I'm not, you know, that's a safety concern, particularly on the roadways. Have we looked at that at all in using less salt?
I think that, you know,
go ahead, Lori.
Yes, and that's a lot of what the Lake Champlain Sea Grant program was sharing with municipalities in Vermont, and that the legislation that's going to be introduced in the coming weeks is modeled after a New York initiative, the Randy Preston Act, and New Hampshire's Green Snow Pro. The latter was a program to protect also municipalities from slip and fall lawsuits if they participated in extensive training. And it's really trying to get our municipalities and community members to update their techniques for salt application so that they're using it in a more cost-effective way and also a more protective way. So the brine solutions and these new age, you know, applicators and using temperature monitors to determine when it's most effective to apply things and at what rate really is a better way to go about this, that reduces that salinity overloading into our waterways, but also has better traction results to keep our roadways safe. And so it's a combination of updating our application techniques as well as you know, as well as protecting municipalities, increasing education, and protecting places from liability too.
I know I'm spending 4 years on the Transportation Committee. They've been very happy with the amount of reduction of salt that they've been able to use with the brine, because it breaks it up in parts per billion even more so. So you don't have big chunks of material on the road. You've got a finer mist of product that goes down there, and they've been very happy with the reduction as far as where it is now. Whether it's any less dangerous or any less contaminant, well, I guess we'll figure that out as well.
And then into private sector. I know we have to keep moving because we have other sections.
Yeah, we have 2 more sections that we want to cover. One is AIS, and I'm going to ask Andrew Milliken, who's online, to share a little bit about that. And AIS, sorry, that's an acronym for Aquatic Invasive Species.
Andrew, the floor is yours.
Go ahead, Andrew. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Just sound check. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. So yes, I'm Andrew Milliken. I'm a member of the Vermont Citizens Advisory Committee for Lake Champlain. Recently retired as an ecologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And I am going to be talking today about what we need to do to invest in aquatic invasive species spread prevention in Lake Champlain. Aquatic invasive species continues to be a significant threat to Lake Champlain with the discovery of another species, and non-native aquatic invasive species, the golden clam, that was found this past summer. We're now up to 52 aquatic invasive species in Lake Champlain. And these aquatic invasive species have major impacts on native species, on the ecosystem integrity of the lake, on infrastructure, and on recreation. And I'll just note that the fishery in Lake Champlain has an average annual value in terms of contributions to Vermont economy of about $200 million a year. So it's a pretty big deal. So the things that we can do to help with that is to have increased and more robust inspection programs to prevent the introduction of additional species. And we are recommending that there would be a mandatory decal program for both motorized and non-motorized watercraft that would generate some income to help support a more robust inspection program across the Lake Champlain watershed. And this could be applied to other waterways as well. The other major task is to work really closely with the state of New York as well as Quebec on trying to avoid the introduction of species through the two canals that connect to Lake Champlain. The Champlain Canal that connects us to the Hudson River and ultimately the Great Lakes, and the Chambly Canal through Quebec that connects us to the St. Lawrence River. And there are species that are literally poised to make their way through those canal systems, including the round goby that made its way from the Great Lakes through the Erie Canal to the Hudson River and is now literally knocking on the door of the lock number 2 of the Champlain Canal. And so really working closely with the higher level agencies in in New York and Quebec is going to be critical to figure out how we can have effective barriers in those canal systems. And I think I'll leave it at that with the limited time that we have.
I know we got one more to get to, and we might run over a couple minutes here, but the goals that we have with Quebec and Vermont and New York, are they aligned?
At the natural resource agency level, absolutely. But as you might guess, the canal, I'll speak particularly about the Champlain Canal that is managed by the New York State. It's a canal system that has been used for a long time, has a lot of history and value. Really the decisions about the canal system are at the highest levels of New York government. They are actually at the governor's office level to try to find a way to preserve that canal system while allowing for effective prevention. And unfortunately, 99% effective prevention is still a failure. And so you really do need to have a complete barrier in the canal system. And so it's working with New York to come up with a solution that will allow for boats to be lifted over and into the canal, to the Champlain system, while maintaining the most of that canal system in historic and current state.
And Denise, did you want to add to that?
My only addition would be that, we meet with New York and Quebec pretty frequently as CACs. This is an advisory committee, and through the Lake Champlain Basin program. And, all of the topics that we put in here today, they are also all working on. And people are at different levels, investments are at different levels, depending on the state, depending on the programs, whether it's phosphorus reduction, chloride reduction, AIS. So I would say we are aligned. Whether or not we're all doing the same things to address the issue, I think is the question at stake here.
Who's spending the most money?
Vermont is spending a lot of money right now. We also are one of the biggest contributor for phosphorus, so that is part of the reason why. But Quebec, through the Lake Champlain Basin Program, is an international organization, and we meet with the Minister of the Environment regularly in the executive committee, and they're doing a lot up there as well. And New York is, depending on where you are in New York, they're also really stepping up. But again, it depends on the program, and it depends on all of it. Yeah. But there is great, I will say there's great collaboration and coordination. And as the chair of the CAC, I attend all of the Lake Champlain Basin Executive and Steering Committee meetings right now. And that's been going on for years now, right? I don't know if anybody else wants to add from the CAC on that collaboration and coordination between the three jurisdictions.
I'll just add one more thing, which is there's been a major effort underway with funding through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to evaluate all the options for the Champlain Canal. So that has provided significant support for understanding what the alternatives are that can be effective.
Okay, we'll get to the last one because we are running over a little bit.
Lori, would you take on the public access and recreation for us today?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you. My name is Lori Fisher. I am a Citizens Advisory Committee member from Williston, Vermont, a longtime member of the CAC, and the recently retired executive director of the Lake Champlain Committee. Sorry not to be here in person, but I'm going to focus on recreation in this portion of the presentation. And recreation is just so critical to Vermont's economy. And we see the real need to increase and improve equitable public access to Lake Champlain for all communities. And so for context, recreation contributes $2.1 billion to the outdoor recreation economy. Apologies that in the CAC handout it says 1.5 billion. When we went to press, that was the latest figure we had, but it's really 2.1 billion contribution to the economy. But one of the issues, particularly on Lake Champlain, is we don't have uniform access. And particularly in the South Lake, there's a dearth of access areas there. And we all know that access to our waterways is so critical to fostering stewardship. And so we want to highlight that to the legislature, that we need to make these ongoing investments in the recreational economy, expand access and improve access, and particularly for marginalized and historically disenfranchised communities. As we suffer from water quality problems off and on in Lake Champlain, such as the cyanobacteria blooms that may make at any time a certain beach unavailable, people with less agency and economic opportunities have fewer places to go. And we want to be mindful of that and thinking about our future investments, and also look at and map out where our recreation areas are. And I think Hillary can certainly speak to this from a person geographically located in the South Lake, how few access areas there are. Another thing for us to keep in mind is that when we talk about access areas, we have a lot of fish and wildlife boat launches throughout the state, but those are prioritized. They prioritize motor vehicle use. So the motorboat use is prioritized for those access areas because of the funding stream. Most of those boat access areas are funded through federal funds, Dingell-Johnson monies that come from your license fees and motorboat registration fees rather. So that's why there's that understandable priority of use, but it limits the low impact access recreation areas. And that's something we encourage the state to look at. We've also tried to advance the consideration of a state park in the South Lake or other access areas that would just provide greater opportunities for low impact, non-motorized use. And for further context, the recreation economy is really, really key in Vermont. From 2020 to 2023, in terms of the portion of our gross domestic product, it jumped from 3.7% to 4.8%. We rank second in the country, just behind Hawaii, in the contribution of outdoor recreation as a percentage of the state's gross domestic product. So it's really vital to our, our quality of life here, to our identity, to our economy, and we need to invest in it. And of course, all the other things that we talked about in terms of the impacts on Lake Champlain also affect that recreation economy. So we hope for your support there in just helping us expand access areas and really understanding the necessity of that. Thank you.
Public water is owned by the state. There should be access, and every available person who wants to get out there and enjoy it. I couldn't agree with you more. We're going to move on. We want to thank you folks. We've run over on time a little bit, and we want to be fair to the other folks that have made time to be here.
I have a State of the Lake report.
Thank you so much.
And that's,
thank you very much.
See you next year.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. If you guys need to come back in, you need to get back in, get hold of Linda, and we can get you back in here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
As far as I know, fine. I sure will.
So the chloride, it's starting to kill the small bugs in the river.
All right, we'll see you all soon.
Definition.
Thank you very much, Denise.
It's reached
Thanks for having us.
100.
Thank you. Thank you for coming in.
Some people will be like.
Yes, it's early for us.
It's like not, but for not for the.
Have a great day.
Right.
Thank you very much.
But it's one of those things that it's,
Thanks, Holden.
EPA is gonna come down and just like the phosphorus, there's only so much we can do.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna move on to rural Vermont. We have Graham's in and Caroline.
Caroline, you want to?
And I will join the Zoom so I can share our PowerPoint.
We apologize for running over very much. So,
No worries, I will just.
we'll make
pass
sure
on
you
my
guys
contact
have your time, so.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Mark.
It's always interesting to hear what other people have to say too.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Grab maybe, I will get something together again then.
Take your time, no hurries, guys. We went over on your time. Take your time and be ready and give us the best of what you got.
That's the plan.
Don't worry, only half of this package is for you.
We appreciate that.
I'm just mention this real quick, because this is Graham, Rural Vermont, Graham Unix Group, Policy Director. This isn't for our presentation, this is just in response to something I heard about the road stuff, and it was really interesting to hear your time in the Transportation Committee, but some of our work has done with compost over time, and one of the folks we've worked with is Vermont Compost Company. I know at times those folks have been working with alternatives or complements for road maintenance and spreading, and with this eye towards saline and salt content. So I'm not sure if you all ever brought them in or if they've ever been a part of the conversation in the Transportation Committee when you were there, Chair, but it's something to maybe consider if they were looking at wood chips and or used to other materials.
Ashes, we used to put ashes down.
So we still do ours. Well, with that, thank you all for having us here today. Do you want me to start introducing ourselves?
You guys have the floor. You do whatever you'd like. Just introduce yourself before you start.
Great.
Or as you go to present.
Just quickly for the record, I'm Caroline Sherman Gordon, I'm Rural Vermont's Legislative Director.
And my name is Graham Unick-Strufenach. I'm the Policy Director at Rural Vermont. So I live in Marshfield. I live there with my partner and our 3 daughters, and I also graze beef cattle. I do an assortment of agricultural research and service work, sort of depending on what else I'm doing for work, like this. And today we're going to introduce our organization, Rural Vermont, to this committee. So we were founded in 1985, as it says here. This is our 40th year, and I hope to show you all a little of that history today. We are a statewide, member-based, farmer and farm worker-led, not-for-profit organization based in Montpelier. We are one of the 3 largest Vermont member-based not-for-profit farming orgs in the state, and we do not take government or industry funding. This is our picture of our board, or part of our board, I should say, from the most recent summer retreat we had, just to give you some faces here. We're a horizontally led organization, which means we don't have a head, we're all directors. We're 5 part-time staff directors and a board of more than 12 people, majority farmers and farm workers. When we say we're member-led, I want to give you an idea what that means. And sort of the most simple way of saying it is we mean that we work with our members and non-members and allied organizations to educate, organize, and advocate based on issues identified and determined by our communities based on need and opportunity. We extend an invitation to this committee for collaboration and hearing from community members and other experts on issues that may be before you, and in general, hope you'll see us as a resource and partner in making policy. Just putting our mission up here. So we organize, educate, and advocate in collaboration with local and global movements to strengthen the social, ecological, and economic health of the agrarian communities that connect us all. So as you hear in the mission here, we are primarily working at the local and state levels. However, we also advocate and collaborate in national and international spaces, directly and indirectly through our membership in the National Family Farm Coalition. And this is a gathering at NFFC in Gloucester in 2021 or 2022 that Caroline and I attended, in La Via Campesina, which is a peasant and food sovereignty-based organization, which is one of the largest social movements in the world. And our our director of grassroots organizing, Molly, is our primary liaison to that organization. Carolyn and I are the primary liaisons to NFFC. This is La Via Campesina. So, as this is an introduction to rural Vermont, it's a new biennium, it's our 40th anniversary. I thought I'd take a little time to bring you through some of our history. Some of the work that's happened in the State House over time, some of the issues we focused on, the people we've worked with. And I'm going to move quickly a little through these historical slides because we want to get to the issues that you're all dealing with. But I think it's also important that you all know who we are.
Graham, is that Anthony on the left?
Yeah, it is.
Wow.
It is.
He was on this committee, of course, for many years, and
you might see a few other familiar faces along the way here. So yeah, this is 1985, 1986, and sort of doing the similar work we are now, really working with farmers, a relatively marginalized, underrepresented community, to have their voices heard in policy conversations. This is in the mid-80s, we were at sort of the peak of what was at that time recognized as this farm crisis, when dairy farms in particular were folding at an extremely high rate, and we've seen that trend more or less continue. I think this sign at one of these early rallies really represents a lot of the work we're still doing. It's around essential economic equity and justice for folks on the working lands. Again, we see like this headline to me like really grabs something to me. Last Ditch Attempt for Survival, and this was 40 years ago. And it's the national average income for farmers is something still like on average negative $1,500 or something like that. Folks are still struggling. You see some of these issues up here too. Imports, low exports, political power, too few farmers. I mean, fewer all the time. So you see how this looked. At times this looked like direct actions, people dumping milk in protest. We're looking at people blocking cheese plants to try to get attention. We're looking at some of the early work against the bovine growth hormone. This is where some of our work not only was happening at the state level, but ultimately affected things at the federal level in terms of labeling. You see big issues like current use have been big in our history and in all the histories of this committee and ag committees in the State House. This is to show also that our work hasn't only been international recently. If from the early 90s when NAFTA, GATT, these international free trade agreements, we recognize how these have been hurting family farmers not only in the US, but all around the world. This gets into the RBST and just sort of, again, how that work transcends Vermont and gets into the national. Again, you look at one of the straight feeder And again, just this specter of corporate power and the challenges of the concentration and consolidation of agribusiness on small farms in Vermont's communities. Here we see some of the early debates in the 2000s where what was at the time a very divided farming community around GMOs, and that was often due to the Farmer Protection Act and other things, which put liability for seeds that may have been GMO found at people's farms on those farmers, even though they may not have planted those there. So there's a lot of, you talk to legislators who were here at the time, you still hear a lot of disappointment in how divided farmers were at that period of time. Farmer IDs. This is still an issue. I'm not sure if you've heard about this, but this is about electronic IDs for animals right now, supposedly under the guise of better disease management. But we've been working with organizations out of Texas and all around the states over the last couple of years to try to convince the USDA and our reps to go back on what they are promising now, which is even further enhanced IDs. And if you are raising cattle, as I am right now, you may have gotten a notice from Vermont Agency of Ag in the last few months that we are now required to do a new electronic ID system. The state will no longer provide those IDs for free. We need to figure out how to put them on, and so there's a whole new. That's only the first step, as I understand it, in this new system might be coming from the federal government. But even new administration, things can change. This was around one of the issues that this committee worked on last year: uninspected chicken. This was how the farmer and restaurant put it at the time. In 2007, the original American Flatbread in Waitsfield wanted to serve chicken from their neighbor's farm. Those chickens, there's very few places in Vermont that have USDA inspected chicken slaughtering facilities. So the question was, well, what can we do to make uninspected poultry more available to consumers and restaurants and stuff? And at the time, this committee and the State House acted, and we had an uninspected poultry bill where you're allowed to slaughter up to 999 birds on your farm uninspected, sell those whole birds to the public, to restaurants, and a few other things. And over time, we expanded on that law, including last year, we all made it possible to sell hearted uninspected birds, which has made a huge difference in a lot of folks' lives. We're really interested, if you're interested to hear from more folks who are affected by that. This is hemp. Vermont working with, this is like industrial hemp, this is fibers, this is et cetera, as long ago as 2008, working with the federal government and the Agency of Ag to try to get a pilot program in Vermont. Raw milk. As long ago as 2008, working to get a raw milk program in Vermont. So we have a regulated, scale-appropriate means of safely selling raw milk. 2008, 2009, you all passed the Farm Fresh Milk Restoration Act. This is another act that we've worked to expand over time as well. On-farm slaughter, this is still an issue we work actively on. And for those of you who don't know, Rural Vermont's working with Senator Sanders, Senator Welch, Senator Booker's office, and maybe others. We're working with reps across the aisle and both parties in the Senate and the House and federally to make sure that Vermont and about 30 other states' laws on on-farm slaughter are protected under federal law, because currently they are not, and we're happy to provide more information about that. It's a little complicated, but my purpose here is to give you all a little overview of the diversity of work. This was the GMO labeling law, and again, like Vermont worked with a coalition around this, but again, the federal government decided that to do its own thing. So sometimes we have wins, and sometimes there's steps forward and steps backward. A lot of what we do is invite people in to share their own stories. So we're here today as staff members, but hopefully when you hear from us in the future, we'll be bringing in actual people on the ground. This is Carl Russell and Lisa McCrory that run Earthwise Farm and Forest. Carl really unexpectedly passed away a couple of years ago, which is still a great loss to our community. He was a horse logger. He was also a really strong advocate for on-farm slaughter. And this was one of our small farm advocacy days where you have a lot of farmers in the background here. Some are no longer farmers. You see Stephanie Walsh in the back left, now works for Dairy Farmers of America, for example. We have Katie Spring, who farms here in Worcester. Some other folks in here. But our goal is to have these days where we bring in people to just let them talk, not about our issues necessarily, but what's happening on their farms, what's happening in their communities. This is us visiting one of the farms for New Americans up in the Burlington area at Fort Ethan Allen. So hearing from all our members of our community, not only commercial farmers, but also people who are farming for food resiliency, for enjoyment, for cultural connection. We do tours around the state, whether it's small kitchen table conversations or going to a community and like saying, we need to have a big conversation. This was, I believe, down in Rutland in 2017. And working with migrant justice and working with our community members in the migrant farm worker community. This was pre-Milk with Dignity, and as you probably know, the Milk with Dignity agreement was signed by Ben & Jerry's, and that campaign is still ongoing, as well as other work to support these folks and the farmers who they work with. This is getting into some more recent stuff. Senator Collmore will know a little about this. This is about the chicken forage compost, compost foraging by chickens and poultry farmers. This was a big issue a couple years ago. It's still ongoing. Caroline can talk more about it. Part of our work is also not only bringing farmers here, but bringing you all to farmers. So here we see former Senator Starr, we see Representative, I believe that's O'Brien, and that's Tom Gilbert from Black Dirt Farm. This is up at Buzz Ferber's farm in Berlin, where they're doing composting and chicken foraging. We found it really important to engage with healthcare as a farming community. Oftentimes it's not thought about as an ag issue, but when it comes down to it, farmers are just humans. And farmers and farm workers are disproportionately impacted by healthcare needs and the cost of healthcare, its affordability, its accessibility, whether that's because of income, status, or because of your rural versus urban nature. This is getting into our federal work on on-farm slaughter and some of the work we've done with a huge coalition. You see Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance out of Texas, the Farm and Consumer Legal Defense Fund, the National Family Farm Coalition. We have some of the large national organizations to really work on this law. At the same time, like I said, we focus on education. So we've started the first agroecology school in North America, modeled off of similar schools in Central and South America and all around the world through La Via Campesina. And we just started our first course this last fall, and we continue to bring that. And that school is unique because it also provides opportunities to really bring folks from around the world to interact with farmers here. This is Freddie Congo on the bottom left, who's from Ecuador, now Mexico. This is Yorlis and her son Balam, who looks like in the top one. From Nicaragua, she's a beekeeper. He's been a farmer for many years. Coming to Vermont to talk about the issues they face, the issues we face, understand each other. This is a big gathering in Marshfield we had. Here you see farmers visiting farmers from around the world. This is a Nicaraguan family coming to visit Sweet Rowan Farm, the Northeast Kingdom, share their stories of farming around the world. And part of this work is also doing work parties where we bring people to work on farms, support the work that's going on, seeing how we can actually be a real support to those farmers. We offer workshops, chicken processing, on-farm slaughter, taught by farmers. We go around to farmers markets and events, sharing artwork, sharing organizing, sharing what we can do at the level to support people on the ground. We made this banner this year at Farming. So we're just trying to get out all around and share our message and give people opportunities to engage. And you might see some of these stickers around. And with that, here we are today. So I'll start with sort of my work. And again, my formal title is a policy director here at Rural Vermont, and that means sort of you'll see me, not as much as Caroline, but you'll see me here, depending on the issue. One of the ones I've been working on is this Farm Security Fund. I know you all heard from NOFA briefly, if not for their full introduction. So they may have already spoken to this. I was here for the part of the food security presentation. I'll just remind you quickly what this is. The purpose of this is to provide reliable, rapidly available recovery funds to farmers impacted by climate emergencies and extreme weather. And Rural Vermont's worked with NOFA and a large and diverse group of stakeholders in the ag community over a number of months to consider this. This is from the Farm Bureau to the Farm Viability folks, the Agency of Ag. So we're looking at the impacts of some of our more significant recent climate and weather-related events, how farmers, and farm workers and those supporting them have needed to respond, what resources have been available to them, how adequately have they functioned, and what are the gaps, what are the needs? You know these questions, right? We know that Vermont is a unique agricultural state in a number of ways, from our landscape and how weather plays out across it to the diversity of farms here in terms of type and scale. The Agency of Agriculture survey following the flooding of 2023 found that 70% of applicants were not covered by crop insurance. And we know that even farms which are covered by crop insurance are not being made whole or even having all their losses addressed. We know that farmers need rapid belief that getting funds out quickly is important and easier to do at a local level with the state program. We're excited to be working on this project and to share more about it as we move forward. And as NOFA may have told you, the legislation isn't completed yet, so I can't talk about the specific appropriation until we know exactly what that's settled on. I will say there's also conversation with our federal staffers at Senator Sanders and Walsh's office in particular about the emergency funds coming from the federal government through block grants in particular to the state, and how that may or may not interact with this fund as well. Over the last few years, we've seen more than 250 new farmers in one particular sector of Vermont's agricultural economy, but you wouldn't know it because these producers aren't considered farmers. The product they produce isn't considered agricultural. They can't produce on land in the Vermont Land Trust. They can't produce on land which is part of an NRCS contract or on land the tenure of which is funded in any way by the federal government. These are Vermont's licensed outdoor adult cannabis producers. It looks like there we go. They are audited multiple times a year by multiple entities. They pay thousands of dollars for insurance and banking and basic administrative costs. We estimate an average tier 1 producer, which is the cheapest way of getting into the market, spends at least $15,000 to $20,000 a year for administrative work alone. That's not even running their business. Amidst these unreasonable burdens, they can't even sell their product directly to consumers, meaning they are mandated to lose half of the value of what they produce to someone else who will capitalize on the value and expertise of their work. So the Vermont Cannabis Equity Coalition, I think you'll hear from us on Friday, is Rural Vermont, Nova Vermont, Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, Vermont Growers Association, and the Green Mountain Patients Alliance. I'll give you a brief overview now, but we're all member-based, not-for-profit organizations representing stakeholders affected by Vermont's cannabis regulation. We hope to be a resource to policymakers in relationship to cannabis policy and connecting directly with constituents who are stakeholders. Our coalition has been advocating for regulated cannabis community and economy in Vermont, which is racially just, economically equitable, and agriculturally accessible since pre-regulated market times in Vermont. So this year we've come having engaged in 3 separate legislatively convened working groups since the last session: outdoor setting and advertising, which is very relevant to you all, medical, and social equity, which is also relevant to you all. So we've also continued to meet with different communities, allied organizations, the Cannabis Control Board, to grow mutual understanding and support of the issues emerging and the needs of this regulated community. So some of our clear priorities I've put up here, and I'll talk to you more about them on Friday, but one is establishing ongoing funding and expansion of the Cannabis Business Development Fund, which James Pepper will tell you specifically about on Friday. This would include a farm viability type apparatus for smaller tiers of cultivators and particular categories of licensees, because what we're being told right now is that these people aren't agricultural producers, they can't access agricultural service providers. So we want to establish also a proportion of the excise tax to ongoing reinvestment in communities through funding the Land Access and Opportunity Board. That group, I'm sure, will be in here as well, and they do work based on land access, public health, education for some of our most marginalized communities in Vermont. It's fairly standard for states to invest significant portions of cannabis excise tax into a fund addressing the harms of criminalization. Vermont has not done that at all. These 2 items are also going to be recommended in the CCB's own social equity working group report, which the legislature asked for. One of our main priorities, which you'll hear about and is very relevant to your committees, is striking language adopted last year, allowing for new municipal powers over outdoor cultivation. That's cultivation districts with pre-established maximum setbacks. And we would like to see us continue to enumerate in law the status of agriculture for outdoor cultivation. Vermont had been a beacon nationally for its work in this regard, and New York is now recognizing adult use cultivation as agricultural. The outdoor setting working group evaluated the data from municipalities gathered by the CCB, from producers, from subject matter experts, including lawyers, and we see no evidence or substantial enough evidence to justify the actions taken legislatively last year. To the contrary, see clear harm that will be caused to existing businesses and potential businesses by allowing last year's language to stand. We also feel like this is a canary in the coal mine for agriculture in some respects. If you see the lawsuits in Essex, you also see that this actor is being sued. The Agency of Agriculture is being told by the town, or it's being brought into question whether or not the Agency of Agriculture has jurisdiction, or whether the municipality has jurisdiction over the duck part of the operation there. So there's also a challenge to how ag is regulated. Another primary goal of ours is direct market access for tier 1 and 2 cultivators and tier 1 manufacturers. Talk more about this on Friday, but essentially we know that small farms, small farmers, many small businesses cannot survive without direct sales. They can't survive without direct relationships with their communities, with their customers. We don't have a cannabis market which is saturated. You'll hear that all the time. We have a market which is bottlenecked, geographically concentrated, in which market power is highly centralized to retailers. Direct markets are not an option. They are an economic necessity for survival of many cannabis cultivators and manufacturers. They are established and relied upon for other agricultural operations of a similar scale and type. They've been established and relied upon well before there was a regulated market. And in all honesty, they will be relied upon whether or not they are allowed in the legal market. And it's part of the state's mandate to ensure that the illicit market comes into legal. And this direct market part is a huge barrier to that. The last one I want to talk with you all is just public consumption, because currently in Vermont, you can only consume cannabis if you own the home or property you're consuming on. You need the renter's permission, otherwise there's no public consumption outdoors. So this establishes a fundamentally inequitable and potentially dangerous environment in which a market is established with legal mechanisms only protecting those with the most economic privilege among us, which is disproportionately particular demographics of people in Vermont and nationally. So the consequences of not having reasonable, free, and accessible places to consume cannabis are not hard to imagine. And we even heard the CCB, the director, James Pepper, who'll be on Friday, say last year in testimony that the legal gray area of consuming in parked cars is very popular, as there are so few legal spaces to consume. I don't think any of us want to see that. It may or may not be in your purview, but I think it's something to consider. New York has passed a public consumption law, and Vermont is well positioned to do the same. One of our other priorities, and this is also a coalition priority, is the fair share for Vermont. So this coalition proposes policy to increase taxes on personal annual income over $500,000 by 3%. The proposal would raise over $98 million each year in state revenue and would only affect the wealthiest 2% of Vermont taxpayers, bringing the tax burden more in line with that of most people in Vermont. We sort of see this as low-hanging fruit for addressing economic equity and public resource needs in Vermont. We know our public sector needs more money.
What happens when those folks leave?
Explain more.
What happens when they leave?
Why do you think they would leave?
They do leave.
They can go anywhere. They have all the money. Why would 1% increase in their taxes affect them?
No, they're already paying a large percentage of taxes, but they do leave. I've owned real estate companies. They leave.
I guess our perspective is that people need to pay an equitable share of their taxes.
Okay, well, there's a tax code in the United States, and it's all there, and they pay their taxes and all of that, and why should we, just because they have done different, why should they, because they do leave. They go to other states.
I have a quick thought about that. The BBC and other news outlets have reported that Vermont has some of the highest quantity of safe counties in the whole country. When we look at how climate emergency will develop over the course of the next 30 years alone, the safety of those counties, people will, I've gone to Vermont Law School. Many of my peers wanted to move to California because that's, where you get work and as an attorney or something. I think the tide is shifting. Vermont has been a state of less than 1 million people for so long, but more and more people from all across the country look to Vermont as one of the most safe places to live.
But you have just as many people leaving as coming here. You can use the statistics that you like, but it's not accurate. I'm in business. I see it. We do that, but I'll let you continue.
Yeah, well, I would just say also that, historically in the US, we used to tax higher income rates at a much higher percent. So part of this is also restoring some of our historical integrity in terms of making sure we can give the public sector what it needs to provide for public benefits. I heard Senator Major speak the other day eloquently about the greater good. And to me, this really falls into that category of policy. I will say as well that if this issue comes to your committee, we are part of this coalition, but we're not the primary driver of it. And I think the Public Assets Institute would be one of the best people to ask those questions to. And I recognize and respect your experiences in real estate, and also recognize that other folks are looking at other needs and other data as well. Pesticides and toxic compounds, you all heard some about this earlier. So we worked last year with the Protect Our Pollinator Coalition to monitor and influence the work on H706, which is a neonicotinoid transition bill from last year. So that's not necessarily in your all hands anymore until there's some of this rulemaking has gone on, but we'd like to ensure that the processes established for variances for integrated pest management and associated issues. How did I lose this page? Sorry, y'all.
No, take time.
I did have 2 copies, but I think they got mixed up in the printer. There we go. We want to make sure that these things end up having integrity environmentally, agronomically, and logistically for the farming community. So we heard a lot of concerns from the farming community about sourcing seeds. And that is a huge, important concern. That needs to be a part of this process just as much as we need to make sure these variances ensure that we have the integrity of committing to these parameters around keeping neonics out of our environment and limiting their use. So to us, this is really a situation of just transition. We want to make sure the agency works with integrity on that. We want to make sure environmental groups work with integrity on that. We want to make sure this captures all the goals of this coalition over time. We're also looking forward to continuing discussion on the implementation of Act 131 from last session. This is the PFAS Consumer Products Bill. In which restricted and non-restricted use pesticides are explicitly named as product, which must be assessed. And we just want to make sure the pesticides are not disincluded from this list. There's substantial evidence from independent testing pointing to PFAS contamination of pesticides, and I know you all are hearing about that. Caroline can speak more about it. She's more of our PFAS expert in-house. And lastly, some things you've already heard about, but just more tertiary things, maybe not tertiary. Supporting NOFA's request for base funding, supporting prop cash and fair share programs. You all heard about that in food security work the other day. The farm to school and early childhood education work. So reporting that request, the base funding of $500,000 for farm to school and early childhood grants, as well as the $500,000 for local foods incentives grants. We are beginning to do some organizing related to improving Vermont's cottage food laws. So that's like what the income thresholds are for home-based kitchens, for making breads, or et cetera, outside of being a commercial kitchen, or all those different next suite of regulations. And I think the last issue I'm going to touch on a little briefly is this issue of the future of agricultural regulation in Vermont. And I don't know if you all have heard from Conservation Law Foundation or Michael O'Grady or anybody about this issue with the water quality regulation and the future of ag, but in terms of de-delegation, we have met with Conservation Law Foundation. We've met with Laura and Ryan at the Agency of Ag to have a conversation about this. It was prior to the holidays, so we recognize the EPA has submitted some stuff since then. We have not had a time to come to a conclusive statement on this as an organization, conversation with our board, et cetera. The last EPA, I think, statement was released on Friday, in which they responded to the plan from ANR and VAFM. But I think from our initial conversations, I want to be a little careful with how I'm saying this. We don't understand how shifting a substantial portion of water quality oversight to ANR, as Conservation Law Foundation proposes, makes a lot of sense as a solution to the problems named by the EPA and evidenced by the Agency of Ag's records. Namely, that's the ANR did not adequately follow up on the Agencies of Agriculture's enforcement recommendations and never issued any permits despite many, many referrals from the Agency of Ag over the years. So if ANR needs more capacity, that seems reasonable. But the EPA pointing to conflicts and challenges between the Agency of Ag and the Agency of Natural Resources, from our perspective, isn't a reason in and of itself to shift oversight entirely to ANR. And in fact, we'd be very concerned about this. What's not working about the relationship? And I think ultimately it's frustrating that whatever extent the disagreement and conflict between these agencies exists, the ones to suffer are the people on the ground, farmers, people who are being regulated. And as you know, the Agency of Ag, we would want to understand what this plan would look like. How are you going, if folks are proposing divesting this type of regulation from the Agency of Ag and sending it to ANR, what does that mean for Agency of Ag staffing? What does it mean for our grant programs, which are often funded through water well quality funds? What does it mean through all technical assistance provision? When those people are visiting those farms to make those assessments, they're often also working with farmers to help them correct on the ground, to help them access programs. That all goes to ANR. What does this all look like? What's the agency staffing? What do their grant programs look like? What does technical service provision look like? And from my perspective, just thinking about initially, you're talking about a lot more interplay between those agencies than a lot less. Right now, it's just about Cape permitting, and with the direct discharge, and that's it. It's a referral. ANR is supposed to look at it. Now you'd be talking about lots of points of interconnection, trying to refer different problems on the ground, trying to get technical service credit for the Agency of Ag because the Agency of Natural Resources did municipal inspection. So I guess from our perspective, just to keep it short, we would urge this committee to look more at what VAFM and ANR and the administration has proposed as opposed to what the Conservation Law Foundation is proposing right now. The Agency of Ag does a lot of great work with farmers. We don't always agree with them, but they are really integral from a technical service provision standpoint and from an education and correct. They tend to come at it from a correct the action on the ground versus a punitive approach immediately. And that's needed to actually get problems dealt with sometimes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Graham, is there a bill in play or is this just a recommendation from CLF?
Carol, maybe you can answer that question better.
We don't know yet if they have a bill coming. That was kind of pre-session conversations we had with them, that this is what they might gonna propose, and we witnessed O'Grady referencing the advocates calling for that, and we just wanted to make sure that
Okay.
we are advocates. We might not call for that.
Yes.
Yep.
And we did watch the Conservation Law Foundation present in-house natural resources as well, so we've been seeing their perspective as well, and just wanted to let you know a little bit about where we're coming from, that we haven't had a chance to look at it all with our board and think about.
Thank you.
I'll turn it over to you, Karen.
Yeah, if there's not other questions just for Graham, I'd be happy to tag on there. We'll take a short pause if there's any additional questions for you. If not, then I will steer right on with my part. So, again, for the record, Caroline Sherman Gordon, Legislative Director of Vermont. I live in Tunbridge, Vermont, and operate a small sheep farm since 2022, Fool's Farm. And I was born in Germany. I'm a dual citizen, German-American. I live in Vermont since 2017, and I found Vermont because Vermont Law School has such a unique policy program that looks at systems change in agriculture and food systems, and I was literally not able to find something equivalent to that in all of Europe.
What's a small sheep farm?
20 breeding ewes.
And what are they used for?
So it's a dual purpose breed, Romneys. We sell all our wool wholesale to a local sweater making company, Muriel's of Vermont. I wanted to wear my wool sweater.
Good day for it.
Yeah.
It's like not fancy enough. And then we sell our lambs alive. Either people want them as pet sheep and have some of their own sheep, or they're going to be slaughtered on the farm by itinerant slaughter Mary Lake on behalf of the new owners. And then they access that meat, and we work with our local butcher shop, Roma's Butchery, for the processing as well. So as Graham said, really appreciate the successful collaboration with legislators on this committee over the course of our 40-year history as a nonprofit organization, and that advocates, organizes, and educates on these issues that affect the agrarian communities that feed us all. And also from me, just a quick recap of recent and also pending legislation. So we really thank this committee for the passage of Act 93. That's a bill that allows poultry producers now to sell on-farm slaughtered, uninspected poultry also in parts. And as Graham said, we're really known for this work in favor of on-farm slaughter of poultry and livestock for many years now. And I'm really proud for rural Vermont to really also spearhead that federal legislation with Senator Welch and Senator Sanders that's actually also endorsed by our Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. And the legislation there that we're looking forward to reintroduce is the Livestock Owned by Communities to Advance Local Foods Act, or Local Foods Act in short. And that what it would do is would clarify in the Federal Meat Inspection Act that it is legal when farmers sell livestock alive and the new owners have the animal slaughtered on the farm where it was raised without inspection, basically also what I do at Fool's Farm right now. So we're excited about the reintroduction of that bill. We think it has a good chance to pass us with the upcoming farm bill because it's bipartisan, no money attached, and actually will only clarify what's already written in USDA guidance. So also just a quick statement about our members. So give you my contact information because it's my role as legislative director to monitor much of your committee activity and share that information about pending legislation with our members. And also I'm striving to organize for opportunity for our farmers to voice their concerns with your committee directly in the legislative process. And Graham mentioned this briefly, but it's been over a decade now that we've been partnering with NOFA Vermont on this format that we call Small Farm Action Days, where farmers, activists, food enthusiasts alike come here, learn about the legislative process, get a chance to speak to both ag committees, and really just raise their voice and to address concerns they have, whether subject to pending legislation or not. And if you check out the Rural Vermont website, I put a link in my testimonial. You have this, what I say written out. We have a new activist toolkit because we realize there's quite an entry barrier to even show up here in person. So we created like a little video. Senator Collmore's on it very vaguely too. If you want to check it out, just
I will.
To encourage people to make themselves more familiar with the State House and how to show up here. Then I want to talk quite a little bit about conservation. So I've been representing rural Vermont in the Vermont Conservation Strategy Initiative on the agricultural lands working group this past year. It was the inventory phase of a two-part process. And that is, the acronym is VCSI, and it's Vermont's 30 by 30, 50 by 50 process. That's led by the Housing and Conservation Board and also the Agency of Natural Resources. And it's to implement Act 59 of 2023. That's the Community Resilience Biodiversity Protection Act. So during that inventory phase, we've been quite dissatisfied with the engagement process. with the lack of transparency of the process and its compliance with public meeting laws and Vermont's environmental justice policy. So we asked Vermont Law School Center for Agriculture and Food Systems to take research into the issue of 30 by 30 and the process here in Vermont specifically. And one of the students suggests that the Act 59 implementation has fallen short of compliance with the state open meeting laws and environmental justice laws, and stating, for example, that the records posted under VHCB's website are inconsistent, unorganized, while some of the required information is there that appears incomplete and not clearly presented. And I have those memos to share now. They've been edited. They were just finalized at the end of December, and I would be happy to follow up with them. There was a second memo, basically researching where 30 by 30 is coming from nationally and internationally, and is exploring our concern at Rural Vermont that the initiative is intended to serve the development of carbon markets here in Vermont. And we're, as Graham said, part of the largest international food sovereignty movement, La Via Campesina and the National Family Farmer Coalition, who both call these carbon markets false solutions to climate change because they're designed to commodify nature and to enrich natural asset companies instead of realizing the systemic changes farmers voice they need to grow more food and become better land managers. So the research indicates some of the states use carbon markets as a funding source for this implementation, but not all states do. And then finally, a third paper looked at what could be alternative pathways towards community resilience and biodiversity protection, because the whole discourse around 30 by 30 looks at how can we get 30% of Vermont or 50% even into permanent land conservation with conservation easements. And that would actually cost Vermont approximately $375 million over the course of the next 5 years. Those high price tickets, even just to get the 30 by 30 goal done. And we...
Does a 30 by 30 goal count already land that's in current use?
No.
Why not?
Because it's not qualifying, the way it's currently in the statute, it's not counting as permanent.
Right.
And I would say like current use as well as easements, both are not a tool that's per se protecting farmland from development because they're also both voluntary. Well, but what we do stress at Rural Vermont is that if we think about conserving 50% of the state with easements, if we would keep that lens narrow on what counts as conservation, then what would happen? What would happen to the inaffordability of farmland for farmers, the inequitable access of housing in the state, and with the already occurring price inflation of property prices? So without going too much in any detail of what this research suggests as alternative pathways, this is exactly the discourse we'd like to have. How can we, what would be alternative pathways to get to our goals, looking at exploring current use, exploring Act 50, exploring regional planning that's happening anyhow. Because we believe if we do it all in easements, the price inflation will just get more and more severe. And so far, none of the inventory phase has done any economic analysis on that question of price inflation. So we spoke about this also with the Governor's Future of Agriculture Commission, and we're gonna have a meeting with them soon to hear what they did a series of interviews on land access issues, and they're gonna have a presentation with a close circle of people in a week from now to share back about maybe some other policy ideas that they were able to gather. And I just want to stress to this committee that, you know, there was a lot of laws passed in recent years around land use, and neither of them protects farmland from development, whether that's the Act 250 revision and Act 181 of 2024, the River Corridor legislation, Act 121 of 24, the Home Act, Act 47 of 2023, not the mentioned Act 59, also not the Global Warming Solutions Act of 2020. And finally, on this conservation topic, I'm also serving now as a commissioner on the Two Rivers Ottauquechee Regional Planning Commission for a couple of months now. And so this is Vermont's largest regional planning commission. And this year is going to be a huge year for all the RPCs across the state to implement all these new land use laws. And I just want to share that our regional planning commission that I'm serving on has a future land use map, and I just wanted to share my screen and show you that regional future land use map I'm concerned with now as a commissioner, because I hope this what I have here on my screen is not moving. Future land use from 2020, again, this will be under revision this year, but I want to point out is it has a little legend. This legend does not include agricultural land. It's all just somewhat rural, white. And of course that is a problem because we also allow for sprawl development, and it's likely a mix of residential forest and agriculture all in one category there. To return to my talking points, I want to close with this PFAS issue. I'm really not an expert on PFAS, but I have been working for rural Vermont on the issue with a coalition we call Protect Our Soils Coalition, where we looked at this compost foraging topic, composting food residuals on farms. And as part of the discourse around that, we also looked at industry called depackaging, where you have a facility that mechanically separates packaged food scraps, the scraps from the packaging. And in that coalition, we provided public comment to stress that whatever comes out of those depackaging facilities, because it's like mechanically crushing and grinding packaged food scraps, the likelihood of the end resource being contaminated by microplastics is so high that we don't want those slurries and the digestates to be land applied, because we just asked for precautionary principle to be applied and to find another outlet for those resources. And I think when we talk about PFAS from sewage sludge, we would stress and endorse a similar approach. I think we need to learn from what happened in Maine and anticipate legacy contamination to be found also in Vermont soils. And I've been traveling to Maine with Maine Farmland Trust to learn about what they did to address their legacy contamination and the legislation they passed, and spoke to farmers there. And one farmer in particular, Adam Nordell, who you know, he had a young family, started a produce farm on a piece of land, and they got sick. And then someday that was associated with their legacy contamination of their field. The PFAS was found in the produce. They had to cease operation. They had to move away there, and they lost everything. And he's basically now an advocate who's really offering himself to come to other states to share what happened to them and to him and others, to make sure that if we're going to address PFAS contamination on our ag land, that we're going to do it, learn from Maine's mistakes and not make farmers an afterthought. What is in the Maine legislation, it leads with a farmer relief, and that what it would include is provisions like a fund to address the PFAS contamination on farms, to provide families' healthcare needs, funds for technical assistance are needed to relocate farms, to buy out land, infrastructure, compensate for the disposal of farm products, all of the above. And so I'm just, if we heard from a couple advocates and also from legislators on the House side that they're interested in introducing legislation that would ban the land application of sewage sludge in Vermont, because it is still allowed. They are testing for PFAS in the sewage, but it is a material that bioaccumulates. And our position on that would be, it has to look like the one in Maine. There's also a Senate version of the Farm Bill that includes the farmer relief section first, front and center. And if we do something about it, it should look the same at the very least. And that's my closing recommendation. Thank you so much for listening to us.
Back to the home slaughter stuff. I did that for 6 years, raised everything, and chickens, turkeys, lambs, beef. How are you finding, or how are your members finding the ability after the slaughter to the packaging places, the cutting and wrapping places? Are we losing numbers with them? Are we gaining facilities, or what's going on with that?
Well, Grant did a survey with the Agency of Agriculture on custom facilities and, let's just speak to that.
I can start speaking to it, maybe you can complement it, but this is the Agency of Agriculture we've sort of been at odds on this issue for a long time, but over the past 2 or 3 years now, they've been very supportive of this work. They supported the work at the federal level, correcting the law. Their concern from the beginning was that the federal law wasn't protecting Vermonters doing this. So they're very happy to see us working to change the federal law. They're very supportive of that, and they're very supportive of the federal on-farm slaughter folks on the ground in general right now. They understand they're trying to make it work. From the actual custom processors and butcher side of things, which I believe you're asking about the
Yes.
numbers, I believe, so we worked this fall or this
Let
summer.
me just put some context to that, and I
Yeah,
apologize to
go ahead.
interrupt you. And for the committee in itself, if you're gonna raise your own beef, or even, you're gonna have, 40 chickens, processed, or 20 turkeys, you better be getting on the schedules on a lot of these people a year ahead of time, or you're not gonna get in. So it's just, that's where it is. So that's why I ask where the availability of that, because it's certainly, raising your own protein has certainly gotten a lot more popular.
Absolutely. And I think part of what is worth complimenting what you're saying is that if you want to get a USDA inspected facility, you have to also be in touch at least a year, potentially even more early. I'm not sure what Ben's experience is here. I think you can come next, but and from a lot of our experiences, I'll get back to your original question. I'll stop rambling. So we worked with the agency this summer and fall to survey these places. It's the first time they've ever worked on a survey for custom processors. And it was really to try to get some data that we could use to support nationally for this on-farm slaughter legislation. The response rate was really poor, which was to be expected. They said even their USDA inspected slaughter surveys have a sort of poor response rate, and when we're just starting to expect that. I believe the numbers are not dropping, and there's actually even incentives for people developing custom slaughter facilities. The agency is really trying to push some of these folks who don't have their own slaughter facilities on premises to do. I don't have the numbers offhand. I believe the agency was saying in the 40s. There's some odd, but I think.
But you'd be aware if it was getting tough.
There's not a precipitous drop I'm aware of in these custom processing facilities. In fact, I think they're doing decently. Like you said, the demand is growing in some respects. I think one of the issues is these itinerant slaughterers themselves. Mm-hmm. Some folks are aging out. You have folks who are used to really existing in the shadows in a lot of ways, and even with the work to try to make their practice more legally protected, I think there's still a lot of concern. So there's this question also of how do we start bringing in new people, and you can maybe speak to a little of that.
Well, that's what we definitely advocate for in DC, that you can become an itinerant slaughterer for less than $1,000 and have a traveling business where you work outside, travel from farm to farm. That's much more appealing to the younger generation American than working inside the slaughterhouse. And it might be the great entryway for scaling up later having your own custom facility, and then maybe it becomes a slaughterhouse over time. And I think that's also what we're witnessing with the custom shops, that they're on high demand. That's where the bottleneck is, you're right, on processing, but that's why we need those custom shops. And not just do we need them, they need the on-farm business. And that's what the survey also shows, that even though there's a reluctance in answering the survey, those who do really underscore that they do need those on-farm slaughter carcasses to do it. And I can just say the local butcher shop has been started up during the pandemic. So it's a new shop online, and I think there were some federal and local programs, grant programs, to support the development of those businesses. And honestly, I would love to develop a custom facility on my farm. I have an old barn that if I can somewhere get the money to invest in that infrastructure, I could process my own animals and save $160 per animal.
Yeah, that's right. Good savings. Well, good. Committee, any more questions?
It's time.
Thank you.
Anything else you'd like to tell us?
Thank you so much for your time. We want to come back, and I think I want to work with Linda, if you guys are supportive of our Small Farm Action Day format, to look at mid to end March, mid-April, to have like 2 of these events during the session collaboratively with NOFA Vermont constituency as well.
Thank you. Thank you for coming in today.
Yeah, thank you.
You're very welcome. Committee, we're going to take I think we're kind of back, we're not back.